Welcome to Running Up the Score. I'm Alex Kennedy. This is my show where we talk all things sports. Today, we have to talk about the NFL. There's a ton of crazy things happening in the last 24 hours. Bill Belichick, Pete Carroll, in college football, Nick Saban, all moving on, mutually parting ways in Belichick and Carroll's case, Saban retiring. We also have NFL playoff games this weekend, so who better to help me break it all down than Trevor Sikkema of Pro Football Focus. Trevor, how are you?
I'm doing great, Alex. I appreciate you having me on the show, and I appreciate you having me on today because there's no shortage of things to talk about. So I'm sure this show and the topics and everything that we'll discuss, it's going to be easy because there's a lot of things to say about what happened over the last 24 hours.
Yeah, we'd already scheduled this to talk about the playoffs and, Bucs-Eagles, and then just it feels like every hour there was another crazy, news story breaking. So Definitely makes it very easy today. Let's start with that. Bill Belichick, moving on from New England Patriots, had been there 24 years, led them to 6 Super Bowls, obviously a dynasty. In recent years, they had really struggled. He was the coach / GM, and, there was obviously some issues on the management side. I'm a big believer in that it's very hard, if not impossible, for coaches to do a great job if they're also GM. I've said it in the NBA too. I think both of those roles require full-time effort and energy. And so if you're trying to balance those two things, one of them is going to end up, struggling. It's either going to be your coaching duties or your GM duties. I'm curious to see if he kind of goes for a similar arrangement with his next team or if he, focuses just on coaching. But what do you make of this decision I'm not sure if it was mutual. They're spinning that's mutual, but we never really know in these situations. What do you make of the situation? And is there a certain team you think we should keep an eye on for Belichick?
Well, Belichick still wants to coach, right? So I can't imagine that it was that mutual that he would want to move on. Maybe it's just a situation where there's a change of scenery needed. But man, 24 years. I don't know how much longer Belichick's going to be coaching. Like, how much longer does he think he's going to be coaching? Maybe if he thinks the end is nowhere near, then maybe that makes a little bit more sense for them to move and to move on amicably. But outside of that, like if he thinks he only has a couple years left, I'm pretty sure he wanted to stay in New England. So who knows about that? You're right. A lot of the behind the scenes stuff. Sometimes we learn it after the fact. Sometimes we just never really get to hear what happened. But Belichick's an interesting story because, of course, I think everyone views him as the greatest NFL coach of all time. And for him not wanting to step away, wanting to continue coach, it's kind of like what we saw with Tom Brady a couple of years ago, this new change of scenery that could create a new chip on your shoulder, a new accomplishment to go after because the Patriots basically accomplished everything, right? They had a dynasty in 2 different decades. I mean, they were just such a dominant team. And when Brady went to Tampa, it was this renewed feeling of there's something new to accomplish, that, okay, now go win it in a new spot, go win it with a new team. And I think that you saw and inspired Tom Brady for certainly the year that they won the Super Bowl and the years that followed. That could be the case with Bill Belichick, but I do think that it's going to be very interesting. Is Belichick going to sit there and say, no, my reputation garners that I will have full organizational control, just like I did in New England? Because I'm not going to lie, I don't think there's any team outside of maybe Carolina that would allow him to do that. We've heard that there's I don't want to say mutual interest. There's interest from the Atlanta Falcons on him potentially being their head coach, but I can't see, they already have Terry Fontenot as their general manager. So even though Belichick's coming in, I got to assume that Arthur Blank, the owner, would set things up to where it's like, no, Terry's the general manager, you're the head coach, and that's probably the only way that you'd be the head coach here in Atlanta. For Carolina, they're searching for everything so much at a ground zero level and David Tepper is certainly so desperate to find somebody that knows what they're doing to get them in the building. Maybe he does give him that full organizational control. I don't think that would be the case with Los Angeles, who is also obviously vacant of a general manager spot. And so really outside of Carolina, I don't know anybody else who would even be willing to give him that sort of situation. And so it might be a different Belichick. Like we might have to see a different kind of Belichick because if it's not going to be in Carolina, which there's understandable reasons why it wouldn't be in Carolina, given how far it feels like that team is away, it's just going to be a new look from what we've seen from Belichick over the last 24 years.
I feel like the Belichick news, there have been a lot of rumors swirling, for about like a month or two now. So it wasn't too surprising to see that today. The real surprise was Pete Carroll. I didn't see that coming. And There's a lot of people on Twitter, I think, reacting as well that were shocked. And I think as of last week, he had said like multiple times that he'd be back next year. So again, that's another one that was spun as mutually parting ways, but it seemed like he was even blindsided by it based on, what he was saying a week ago. He's going to stay with the organization as an advisor. Who knows if that's a Bruce Arians type thing where it eventually turns into like a retirement, or if he decides to coach again. He is 72 years old, so he may be done. What did you make of that situation? And I guess what the Seahawks team is very interesting to me because they went to 10 postseasons in 14 years with Carroll. They won a Super Bowl. This team was solid this season. Do you think, how attractive is that job, I guess, in Seattle?
Oh, I mean, it should be a attractive job given, how invested the ownership is, the fans are. John Schneider's, I think, a great GM. So I was very shocked that this job came open, and even a report yesterday as Pete Carroll was kind of giving his exit interview as the head coach, there was a quote where he said he competed pretty hard to still be the head coach of this football team. And so even though it was like you said, they said that it was a mutual parting of ways, or he was just transitioning into a different role within the organization, he clearly wanted to be the head coach still, even up until the press conference that we saw yesterday from him. So I think there's a chance that he coaches again. And you know what? I wonder if it's not going to be in the NFL. I wonder if this year he's going to stay with Seattle, and then next year he actually maybe goes back to college. Because when I think about Pete Carroll, you think about the personality that he is and how everyone just loves how inviting he is, how he always puts people in great places to be their best, get the most out of their strengths. He talked about yesterday, he was talking all about, there's something that I'm so proud of is that, I felt like we always worked with players to get their best, and that's what it's all about. That's what building an organization and a great winning team is all about. And I think at the college level, you get that more than anything because you are still shaping young lives and you are an influence on these young lives and you're giving them great discipline. You're giving them great role models, you're setting themselves up well for football, for life, all this stuff. So I would actually love to see Pete Carroll coach in college again. Now, I don't know if it's going to be like a Power 5 program or anything like that, but maybe he spends 1 year in Seattle and he's like, you know what? I wasn't coaching for a year. I still want to coach. And he goes to, I don't know, some FCS school, or maybe it's, FBS school, but it's like a group of 5 school or whatever it is, not as much pressure, not all this like extreme pressure, but like he still gets to do what he wants to do, which is, shape people's lives, impact people's lives, that kind of thing. Cause when he talked over the last week, it didn't seem like he was done with that. So I wonder if he really does get back into coaching a year from now.
Yeah, I think people see 72 years old and they assume, okay, he's done. But to your point, I mean, a week ago saying that he'll be back next season, even during the press conference, hinting that he still wants to coach. It's very possible. We'll see if that's this year or a year from now or whenever. But I think there would be plenty of teams interested if he's willing to continue coaching. When you look at the 8 coaching vacancies, the different jobs that are out there, which one is the most attractive in your opinion?
I actually think that Washington's is the most attractive. Like, I love what I'm hearing from the new ownership, Josh Harris, who is spearheading that ownership group. All of the GM experience from not just the NFL, but you guys see like the NBA, the Warriors' old GM. He is now a part of their staff. And so they just seem to have such a great brain trust there. And I'm slightly worried that there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen right now when it comes to like that high level decision making, but it seems like they're going about it the right way. And when you look at Washington, a lot of their roster is pretty flexible. They can move on from a lot of different guys. They've got 5 top 100 picks. One of them's number 2 overall in the draft. So you're probably going to get one of the franchise quarterbacks, either Caleb Williams or Drake May, to start things off. So to me, new ownership kind of invigorating that fan base, that organization, being willing to spend that money, do what you need to do to succeed. It's Harris is somebody who owns multiple sports teams already. He's a part owner of the 76ers. He's a part owner of the New Jersey Devils. So it's like he's kind of been around the block, even though he's his first time as an NFL owner. He understands what it's like to own a team and what it takes to be successful there. So to me, that's why that job is the most attractive. I think you got a lot of roster flexibility. You got to love what you're hearing from the owners. You got to love how excited they are. And the fact that one of those draft picks that you have is number 2 overall, and you're about to get a franchise caliber quarterback on a rookie deal. So in all honesty, Washington's the top job for me.
Yeah, I think quality ownership doesn't get talked about enough, or it's not. I think enough fans don't realize just how important that is. Just because I think most fans, probably can't name every owner in the NFL or the NBA, but I've talked to executives who have said the hardest part of my job isn't going out and trying to convince free agents to sign with me or make the right draft pick. It's trying to sell my owner on all the things I want to do. So when you have a quality owner that's willing to just be hands off, kind of trust you, and pump money and resources into what you want to do, and make your staff bigger and spare no expense when it comes to everything in the organization, it just makes life so much easier. So I think that's a huge factor.
That's a tough thing that people don't realize is you have some of the beyond there's so much that goes into a successful sports franchise, but at the end of the day, there is, well, I guess not one person, but sometimes it's one person. Something it's like one person who literally owns the team. All of the checks that need to get signed, all of the player salaries that need to get paid, the things that happen, the utility bills, the field work, building new stadiums, like all this stuff. It's the owner. Like it's literally their money. And so they have every right to come in and tell you what to do, tell you how to run the team, tell you what players they want to go after, all this stuff. And there are some crazy stories that have both been told and not been told of owners just walking in and almost taking hostage of a situation where it's like, man, if you would have just let the general manager that you hired do their job, you'd probably be in a better spot. But even staying in Washington, we heard about stories like that. Dan Snyder would walk in day one of the draft, and Jay Gruden at the time, who was the head coach, they'd do all this draft prep work. They'd watch all this film. They'd come up with this big board. And there's stories of Snyder just walk in and be like, nope, we're picking that guy. And they're like, what do you mean we're picking this guy? We don't want this guy. And he's like, nah, too bad. I signed the checks. I get to make the decision. And it's like, man, to your point, ownership is such a big deal because that's a factor that's going on in Carolina right now, right?
Yeah.
You've got David Tepper, who is one of the richest owners in the NFL, which is truly saying something. Amongst billionaires, he is one of the top billionaires in the NFL, and he wants to be a part of this process. Now, I think that in his perfect world, he wanted to do the Matt Rule strategy. Like, Rule came in and he sold him a dream. He was like, I'm going to control the team. I'm going to control the roster. I'm going to control free agency. I'm going to control the draft. I'm going to control everything. And I bet David Tepper was like, hell yeah, do it. Here's all the power. Here's all the money. Go do it. And it failed. And it failed miserably. And so now I think he's overcompensating. Now I think he's like, okay, now I'm going to get involved. And so now there's been rumors of, okay, did he come in and did he take Bryce Young over CJ Stroud? Is he the one coming in and is like, oh, you need to fix Bryce's footwork. Oh, you need to run more play action
too. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Like crazy stuff like that. And who wants to work for an owner that's not going to give you the freedom to do your job the way you need to do it? And more importantly, is going to look over your shoulder at all times.
They may fire you. I mean, before 1 year even passes.
And that's the thing is like, because here's the thing, if you listen to him and it doesn't work, guess who gets fired? You do. He ain't fired. He's not firing himself. So that's why it just, to your point, ownership, people don't think about how important it is. And at the end of the day, it is the top of the pyramid when it comes to the power chain, the power structure, and it can mean all the difference in the world.
Yeah, I think the fact that in the NFL and NBA, they're all billionaires. So, they're like, hey, I've had tons of success. I've thrived in the business world, typically thinks they're the smartest person in the room. So it's like, why wouldn't you listen to me when I can help you? I'm trying to save my organization here. Even if they know nothing about the sport or have done no homework, they think they can help.
If I earned $1 billion, you couldn't tell me a damn thing either. So I can't blame them too much for it. So
I'm sitting here, as like an armchair executive of my Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and I haven't, earned anywhere near $1 billion. So I'd assume if you have $1 billion, I'd only be even more arrogant and big-headed and think I had all the answers. So it does make sense. Let's get to my Bucks, our Bucks, really. Bucs-Eagles this Monday. These teams are in very different situations. The Bucs have won 5 of 6, even though the last 2 weeks of the season were really ugly. The Eagles have lost 5 of 6. They look awful. They can't really stop anyone on defense. They changed defensive play callers to Matt Patricia and somehow got worse. It's been rough, but they did win 11 games this season. it's crazy to think that they went from winning 10 of 11 games to what we've seen in the second half of the year and just how much they've imploded. It seems like the players don't really trust the coordinators or the coaching staff. They have a lot of talent, but not only are they struggling, in terms of scheme and just everything, they're also really banged up. Jalen Hurts has a finger injury. A.J. Brown has a knee injury. Devonta Smith has an ankle injury. I think DeAndre Swift is also in the injury report with like an illness. They lost a safety. I mean, it's really rough right now. What do you expect from this game? Do you think that this is going to be a close game? And I guess who are you leaning toward right now if you had to make a prediction?
Yeah, on top of all that, it's supposed to be rainy weather down in Tampa on Monday night, so you could throw that in there as well. It's wild because I was actually having a conversation with my dad this morning, and my dad, he's a big Tampa sports fan. That's how I became a Tampa sports fan growing up. And he's like, there's no way the Bucs should beat the Eagles, right? And I was like, well, on paper, yeah, sure, it should be the Philadelphia Eagles, but they're not playing anywhere near their potential. And in fact, like you said, if you go with the what have you done for me lately, sure, it hasn't looked pretty for Tampa. They're winning football games. And I think that this game's going to be a lot closer than people who might be outside of this matchup, outside viewpoints. It's going to be a lot closer than they think. There's a legit shot that Tampa could win this game. Now, I think with it being rainy weather, like if it gets real ugly, that to me actually hurts Tampa's chances because
that's what I was going to say.
Philly can run the ball a lot better than Tampa can run the ball, especially when it's as predictable as a rainy weather game. So in that case, if the weather does turn pretty bad, I'd give this one to Philly because they're still stronger up front with that offensive line. They'll be able to do better against Tampa's defensive line there. But if the weather stays relatively calm, I just feel as though this Bucs team has been able to bounce back. I did not think that was the case going into the season. The Bucs haven't been too different than I thought they would be going into the year. It's just led to about 2 or 3 more wins than I thought it was going to be. Like they're playing pretty much the same, but you look at a week like last week. Okay, if the Bucs play any of the other 30 teams in the league in week 18, they lose. Like that's a loss. They just happen to be playing against Carolina, which is very clearly the worst team in the NFL.
It was gross.
So, right. And so it's like, okay, you could list off their record and say what they are, but it's like, all right, well, in reality, they probably could have caught an extra loss here or there.
And they only beat one playoff team, Green Bay. I mean, most of their wins have been against bad teams. So that's why it's hard to really evaluate them. Like when they actually have played good teams, Philly, when they were playing well, San Fran, Detroit, they lost by double digits.
Yeah. And so that's the thing. It's like they're not that tier one of an NFC team, but going back to where Philadelphia currently is right now, neither are the Eagles. The Eagles are a very beatable football team. And so obviously like weather's going to play into it, but this game to me is a total toss up. I don't know what the line is at this point. I actually have not looked it up, but
I think it's Eagles are favored by 3.
Okay, so that's low enough. I was wondering if the Eagles were going to be favored by like 5, 6, something like that, just because of how bad Tampa played last week. But 3 is pretty much the line there. But even with Tampa getting a field goal, I'd probably bet Tampa there.
Yeah, I think you're right about the weather, too. I mean, I saw an interesting stat. Philly has the second worst pass defense in the NFL this season, which is kind of crazy. You think about their defense and just how great they were entering the year. Like, all the hype was about this defense, and they've been so bad. They're allowing the 3rd most points per game, and then only the Commanders give up more pass yards per game. And so I think Baker Mayfield's health is a huge key. That's one of the reasons why that Panthers game was so ugly. I think he just, the ribs, then he injures his ankle. It's just he was really banged up, and you could tell he wasn't himself. If he is healthy and the weather is decent, I think this passing game with, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, Rachaad White could be really dangerous, and maybe that's how they pull off the upset. If it's a run-first type game, I think the Bucs are screwed. They average the fewest run yards in the league. The Eagles obviously can run the ball really well, so it's going to be interesting. I think whichever team wins is probably going to get absolutely destroyed by San Francisco. So,
yes.
The Niners are just so good. So I'm not a biased homer here saying like, oh, we're going to win the Super Bowl. I think this is like the best matchup for the Bucs possible. And then it's going to be a very short postseason if they do advance. But I want to ask you about Todd Bowles, because right now there's a ton of conversation amongst Bucs fans. I had Luke Easterling on the podcast a few days ago, and we talked about the Bowles situation, and I see both sides of it. I think that there is a case for keeping him. He's won the division 2 years in a row. He's a good defensive coach. I think he's better as a defensive coordinator. But he does have a lot of flaws too. Like, there's clock management issues. There's times where you see there's 9 or 10 players in the field. And that's happened multiple times this season. They've given up touchdowns, which is so frustrating as a fan to see. Again, I think there are positives. The players seem to love him. They never quit on him. They, even when the team was struggling and losing 5 of 6 games or 4 or 5 games, whatever that stretch was, they, the effort was there. They love him. But then you have games like the final 2 weeks of the season where the season's on the line and they just come out flat and don't seem prepared. I also mentioned it to Luke, but I am frustrated with his lack of accountability sometimes. It seems like after games, it's always like we practiced the right things, but the players didn't execute, or throwing other people under the bus. With that said, with other situations, like the whole Devin White situation, he's very loyal and even will lie, it seems, to protect his players. So I don't know. I see both sides of it. I think the way I would sum it up, the Bucs fans that don't like Bowles, I think they just feel like we're not winning a Super Bowl with this guy. We're going to be 7 to 9 wins every year. So if we're going to be a middle of the pack team, we might as well move on. And especially in an offseason like this one, where there's so many good coaches that are available, big name coaches, up and coming assistants. There's like 8 or 9 guys that seem like they could potentially be upgrades over Todd Bowles. And I think if Bowles got fired, let's say they lose this game to the Eagles and he got fired, I'm not sure he gets another head coaching job, which is pretty telling. So what are your thoughts on Bowles, the job he has done, and is he on the hot seat even after making the playoffs?
Yeah, no, I think he absolutely is. And I think there's a world where if Philly really looks good against Tampa, or I should just say this, if Tampa just doesn't look good at all, then that's going to be within the conversation of moving on from him. Because I think you're right. Like, you don't want to live in mediocrity. Like, I think people can point to it, and it's 2 years under Todd Bowles, it's back-to-back divisions. Like, people can point to those things, but it's not really like tangible stuff. It's not like, oh, like we're totally going in the right direction. Like, we know we got the right guy. You're still having questions about it now. So I would move on from Todd Bowles. I just don't think that the team, like you said, there's too many mental mistakes. I think the defense has been way too up and down this season. Things have gone well on offense at times, but it's like, man, the run game has struggled, and yet we're staying with the same like run pass script a lot. And it's just, I don't know. I feel like Bowles kind of has his hand in that. And Canales being a first-time play caller, it's not like he has all of this experience to like push back on it, right? He's a first-time offensive coordinator, first-time play caller. So even if he thought differently, like how much room does he have to push back on Bowles if Bowles is sitting here saying, no, we got to establish the run. We got to run things more like on 2nd and 10. We got to run the ball. Like, I don't know. So I don't know exactly who's making the decisions there, but ultimately timeout management, play management, like it just, I simply put, I just don't think the team has been good enough. I just don't think the team has been good enough. I think, again, the defense has been way too up and down. There have been moments this year, people will be able to point to like certain things that have gone well because it hasn't been catastrophic. Obviously, they're 9-8, but I think the Bucs record is sort of a lie. Like, I think
it's like a default division title. It's a shitty division. They're playing bad teams, for 6 of their games.
Correct. And that's the thing is like, if you take both of those Carolina Panthers games out and you replace them with most other teams in the NFL, like if they happen to play the Patriots twice, they probably split them. If you happen to play the Cardinals twice, you're probably splitting them. And it's just like these are teams that have top 10 draft, their top 5 draft picks, and so I don't think they're getting enough out of the head coaching spot. I don't think the arrow is pointing up enough for you to say, oh, yeah, but look at the record, and just kind of sit on that as a shield and an excuse for the team not being as good as it should be or could be.
That's what frustrated me last year, because entering the season, there was all this hype about, they're like the odds makers had them as like a top 2 Super Bowl favorite. And then they win 8 games and look awful. It's like, well, we won the division. It's like, yeah, but compared to expectations, this team, completely underperformed.
Oh, yes.
And to your point about Canales and who's really calling the shots when it comes to like run, pass, and the predictability of the offense, I think it has to be Bowles, at least to an extent, because we saw the same thing last year with Byron Leftwich, and he never called games like that under Bruce Arians. So it makes me think there was a shift when Bowles took over, and it's affected now Leftwich and Canales, and he's a conservative coach. I mean, we see it in a lot of different, the way he does things. So I think he's definitely at least partially to blame for the predictability and the run pass stuff. So yeah, I would not be surprised if the Bucs move on. Again, I think the fact that you have so many notable names out there now in the coaching free agent pool, I think it probably increases the likelihood that they move on too, just because the Glazers have always kind of been fans of going after like big name coaches. We saw it with the Bruce Arians. They went after Bill Parcells years ago. I think they like kind of making that splash. They know if they go get a notable name or a big up and comer, it's going to help with season ticket sales and kind of make a splash. So and they just experienced being like the it team in sports with the Tom Brady era. So if you can go out there and get, I don't know, obviously Bill Belichick's the big name everyone's talking about right now, but if you could get a Pete Carroll or a Mike Vrabel or even like an up and comer like a Todd Monken, Ben Johnson, I think
I would love if they brought Monken back.
That would be incredible. I've been tweeting about that recently. I think he'd be perfect. I would go after like an offensive minded coach.
He's my top candidate. He would be my top candidate for Tampa. He really.
It makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens this Monday and kind of how that will impact the decision. But one last Bucs question, and we'll move on to some draft stuff. They have some big decisions to make this offseason with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Antoine Winfield, Levante David. I think the order in which I would bring those guys back, or like in terms of prioritize them, would probably be Winfield, Evans, Mayfield, and then Levante, probably on like a 1-year type deal again, like he signed before. But I guess, what are you expecting this offseason from the Bucs in terms of, can they keep their own free agents? Do you think Baker's going to get some crazy payday? I guess when I look at like the market, it doesn't seem like there's a ton of teams out there that could be maybe interested in a veteran quarterback like Baker. They're either, sticking with who they have or they're going with the draft pick. So when you look at like those free agents that are coming up, I guess, how would you prioritize them?
I think Antoine Winfield Jr. is priority number one. I really believe that, like, over the quarterback. I prioritize getting a long-term deal with Antoine Winfield Jr. done. I made this argument on the PFF show earlier this week. I don't just think that Antoine Winfield Jr. is a Pro Bowler or an All-Pro player. Like, he should be in conversation for Defensive Player of the Year.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, he is. He's that good. So I think that you resign him first and foremost. Baker's going to be next. I think Jason Light, their general manager, I think he loves Baker Mayfield. I think he loves the personality. I think he loves the potential. He played well enough. I think Baker's going to get, I don't know if it's going to be like the exact Geno Smith deal or something like that, but it'll be a 3-year deal that will be a decent chunk of change that you will now have to pay the quarterback. Mike Evans is probably next. I don't think you can move on from Mike. And I think Mike wants to be a Buccaneer. I think Mike wants to finish out his career with the Bucs. So I think he'll be a little flexible, obviously getting a little bit up there in age, but he's still awesome. So they'll still have to pay him a good amount of money. You let Devin White walk. I think you let somebody else pay Devin White. And then the sad thing is that with Mayfield playing well, I almost just hope Levante David retires at this point, because I don't think the Bucs will be able to come close to what he can get on the free agent market. Levante David's still playing good football. If he wanted to continue playing, he could. But because the Bucs have to pay Antoine Winfield Jr., pay Baker Mayfield, you're probably not letting Mike Evans get out of the building. David's kind of like one of those dudes that it really sucks, but I just don't know if they're going to have the money to do it. Now, Mike Greenberg's one of the best cap guys in the NFL. So these are players that have spent their whole careers with the Bucs. They might be able to work something out and be flexible here, but I say this like unfortunately, but it's a good thing that Baker Mayfield is playing well. But in the reality of him getting a quarterback level contract, that means you basically have to let Devin White walk. And then I don't know, the best case scenario might be me hoping that Levante David just retires. So I hope he doesn't have to play for another football team, because that would suck to see him in a different jersey. But that's the way that I would see it.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It'll be very interesting. I agree with you on Winfield, by the way. On the show earlier this week, I said the same thing. He should absolutely be a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. It blows my mind that he's not getting more love. If you look at like the odds, he's not even like top 5, top 10, something like that. It's crazy. But he has been so impactful and so much fun to watch this season. Let's move on to the NFL draft. You are the lead draft analyst for PFF. Do a fantastic job. When you look at this draft as a whole, I guess, how do you compare it to other classes in terms of the quality, and what positions stand out to you as being really deep or, full of like potential stars?
Yeah, it's a really fun draft. I think first and foremost, we talk about this every year, but I really do mean it this year. This wide receiver class is nuts. We have 3 guys at the very top of this wide receiver class: Marvin Harrison Jr. from Ohio State, Malik Neighbors from LSU, and Rome Odunze from Washington. All 3 of them could be wide receiver 1 in most draft classes. And I really mean that. Like most draft classes, one of these 3 guys would be the wide receiver 1. So for them to all be in this class, that's very stellar. You get through, back end of the first round, second round, third round, you're going to be able to get an impact receiver on your team. So if you need any sort of wide receiver, this is a great class to be able to do that. I think the edge rush group, even though there's not like a Myles Garrett type of player, a Nick Bosa type of player that's going to go within the top 3, there's a lot of really nice edge rushers that could go anywhere from pick 8 all the way through pick 32. I mean, we might see 6 edge rushers go in the first round, but none of them are going in the top 8 just because the offensive unit is so stacked. And then flip sides to the offensive trenches, a lot of really good offensive tackles in this class. I think, again, we could probably see 5 or 6 offensive tackles go in the first round this year. Corner's really nice as well. And so the reason why this draft's a lot of fun, shaping up to be a lot of fun, is because it's great at the premium positions: quarterback, wide receiver, edge rusher, offensive line, and corner. Like all 5 of those positions have a lot of really great players that I think can be pros for a long time. And those lower premium positions, running back, off-ball linebacker, interior offensive line, safety, it's not really very strong in those areas. You can still get some good players, but for draft intrigue, you always want them at the premium positions, and this year we have that.
Do you think Chicago sticks with Justin Fields? Do they trade the pick? Do they draft a Caleb Williams or a Drake May? What are your thoughts on what they should do?
I think they'd be insane to stick with Justin Fields. And I mean that with all due respect to how well Fields is playing. Fields is playing the best ball of his career right now. And he is putting his best foot forward. And I truly believe that he can be a starter still at the NFL level. The problem is that you're about to go into year 4 of his contract, his rookie contract. If you sign him to his 5th year option, then you have 2 more years of him on a rookie deal. And then you have to pay him a lot of money if he pans out for you. And when I say when he pans out for you, because if you stick with Justin Fields over drafting a quarterback at number 1 overall and it doesn't work out, you're all getting fired anyways. It doesn't matter. Like you're totally rebuilding. It doesn't matter at that point. But even if it works for you, hitting on quarterback is obviously important. So if you had like 100% guarantee, yes, you would do this no matter what, because it's the right thing to do, because you're actually be hitting on the player. But you only have 2 more years of him on a rookie deal, and then you have to pay him a massive deal. That hamstrings you from building out the rest of the roster. Can you build out the rest of the roster the way that you need to? Are you going to be a competitive level team within those next 2 years? I don't know. And the problem with Justin Fields right now is that even though he is playing better, there is no guarantee that what we are going to see at the beginning of 2024 season is just a continuation of what we saw at the end of this year. He could still regress, or he could plateau. So if you are going to risk it, if you will, either way, risk it with whoever's going number 1. Risk it with Caleb Williams or Drake May. Risk it with those guys. And if it hits, you've got 4 years of a franchise caliber quarterback on a rookie deal instead of code. 1 and then a 5th year option, which the 5th year option is a lot more than the regular 4 years anyway. So it's like a giant chunk of change there. So that's ultimately why, all due respect to how Justin Fields is playing, I'd trade Justin Fields and I'd draft a quarterback at 1.
I think that's a terrific description or explanation of why it makes sense. You have to really, really believe in Fields and think the gap between him and Caleb Williams or Drake May is so huge that it justifies, everything it's going to do in terms of hamstringing them financially. So yeah, I think that is really well said. Last question for you. When you look at the other playoff matchups this weekend, which one is most exciting for you? Is there another one that kind of jumps out that, either you could see an upset happening, you're excited to watch it against high scoring? I think the one for me is Chiefs Dolphins. I think that could be really high scoring. Kansas City hasn't been quite themselves, but it's Patrick Mahomes. This offense in Miami is awesome. That's one that jumps out at me.
So the thing about that game is the weather is like in the negatives.
Oh no.
Like it's supposed to be like they're supposed to get some weather rolling through. And that's why that game, Miami versus Buffalo, was so huge, because if Miami would have won that game in week 18, they'd have been hosting this week.
Oh,
and instead they lose the division and they have to go from Miami to Kansas City in like negative 10-degree wind chill weather. Like it's going to be miserable for them. So I'm obviously excited to watch that one, but I don't know if it's going to be as high scoring as we think it's going to be.
Right. That makes sense.
The one that I'm really looking forward to though is Rams Lions, because the storyline of this one is so awesome, right? Matthew Stafford gets drafted number 1 overall to the Detroit Lions, puts his blood, sweat, tears, everything he has into getting Detroit back there. They made the playoffs, I think, twice, but they lost in the first round each time. He could not bring them that playoff win. And it eventually came to a head where both sides moved on. Matthew Stafford went and won his Super Bowl with the Rams, and Jared Goff and that trade has kind of accelerated that Dan Campbell era into look where they are now. They are one of the best teams in the NFC. They are hosting a playoff game. They have a legit shot to make the Super Bowl. And the fact that that quarterback, Matthew Stafford, who was there before them, who gave his everything, is coming back to town for a Lions hosted playoff game, and is now in their way of getting to where they want to go, which is, of course, the NFC Championship game in the Super Bowl. That's just, it's a lot of emotions, and it's a really interesting storyline to follow.
Yeah, both quarterbacks facing their former team in the playoffs. That's a ton of fun. I agree. That's a really good narrative-driven one. That'll be really fun to watch. This has been so much fun. I appreciate you jumping on here. I know things are crazy right now in the NFL. Again, you do a fantastic job for PFF. Everyone, if you're not following Trevor, make sure you are at Tampa Bay Trey. I love his tweets, love his articles, love his show. Just check his stuff out. Anything else you want to promote, or anywhere else they can find work of yours?
Yeah, we talked a little about NFL draft stuff, but if anybody out there wants to go over to pff.com, we got you for everything that you want with the NFL draft. We got the big board. We got the mock draft simulator where you can make your own mock drafts, and just anything that you want to know about the NFL draft coming up, we got you over at pff.com.
Definitely check it out. And if you guys want to check out more episodes of Running Up the Score, you can find us on Twitter, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And until next time, thanks for watching.